Hi everyone, I'm Otis. I'm a tinkerer and an artist from France, and I live in Buenos Aires, Argentina. This video is about how I made a sculpture out of money. So first, for some context, I live in Argentina, and in Argentina, every few years there is an economic crisis. It's like a sad running gag. In 2019, the Central Bank of Argentina decided to discontinue the 5 peso banknote to replace it with 5 peso coins.
Initially, I thought it was because this bill is not worth much and it's gonna keep on being worth less and less, so, it makes no sense to have a banknote worth so little. But it was actually because the 5 peso bill, being the one of least value, they circulate more and deteriorate faster. Which doesn't mean I was entirely wrong. At this point in time, 4 years ago, 1 euro was worth 50 pesos. So at the moment they made the announcement, a 5 peso banknote was worth 10 cents of a euro. And it already bought you precisely nothing. These days, I'm recording this at the end of 2022, 1 euro is worth around 300 pesos. And 10 years ago, I briefly lived in Argentina, and 1 euro was worth 12 pesos. And please note that I'm talking black market retail value, not official change rates you would find on the web. That's because the purchase of foreign currency is very restricted here. So if you want to buy dollars and euros, you have to go to what we call a cueva, which means cave. It's not as scary as it sounds. Anyways, when the central bank announced they were going to take the bills off the market, I started to go on afternoon walks, going from shop to shop, and changing their 5 peso bills for other bigger bills, real money. People were thrilled, of course, since this way they didn't have to go to the bank to get rid of them themselves. I even went and wrote to the central bank to ask them to give me 5 peso bills for an art project, and they replied, and they said yes. I didn't tell them how I would use the bills, though. Now, I had to give them actual money, they didn't just give them to me. I gave them the same amount in proper bills because the bills were still in use at this moment. So you might be thinking, you bought bills that were going to expire in a few months and turn into worthless pieces of paper? Yeah, I sure did. At the moment they discontinued them, I had spent around 200 euros in 5 peso bills. I had around 2,000 bills. Sad thing is, nowadays I could make the same sculpture with 10 peso bills and it would set me back only about 10 euros. Yeah. But you can go to prison for altering money that is still in use, so let's not go there. To prison. So, how am I gonna turn bills, paper, into a solid sculpture? Well, I'm gonna use some epoxy resin as a glue and laminate the bills to create a solid block of composite material, which is very solid, like wood. And I will machine it and sculpt it like wood to create my sculpture. I don't really like using toxic crap like epoxy, but it's basically the world's strongest glue and really my best bet for this project to succeed.
First, I needed to dig up some melamine scraps to make a mold in which I could press the bills together. And melamine is adequate for this application because things don't stick very well to it, and this way demolding is easy. The molds do get thrown away, but these scraps were taken out of the dumpster anyway. The CNC cut that for me, and after cleaning up the tabs that held the pieces together, I could put the mold together. When you want to laminate paper like this, or in this case money, every single bill has to be individually and thoroughly coated with glue. And I thought myself very clever because of how I designed the mold. I thought I could have the side open, dump some resin over it all in the hope that the resin would flow down every little nook, and then close that side down, turn the mold 90 degrees and remove the top to reveal the bills and press them all together. However, the epoxy didn't flow between the bills very well, if at all, in certain areas.
Not that my plant is getting covered in it. Whatever.
So, when I came in the next day, I knew the glue up was not going to be a success. And just as expected, this is a failure. But fear not, I cut up another mold, and this time I went with a trusted method I found out about when researching the interwebs. I dumped epoxy into a container and proceeded to soak and rub each bill in resin before placing it in the mold. This method is very slow and very messy. I sourced an epoxy with a 50 minutes working time, and I could only get about 150 bills in the mold before the epoxy began to gellify, and I had to put it under pressure. This lamination was a success. As you can see, this thing is hard as a rock. This block is not thick enough, however, so I repeated the process off camera by pressing the first blank together with some new bills and hit my target thickness of 30 millimeters, a little over an inch, which amounts to around 300 bills. Then I laid out which portion I wanted to machine in order to make the final piece.
Para defender la causa de la patria no hace falta otra cosa que orgullo nacional.
And I trimmed my piece closer to size so I wouldn't have to machine all that material. I can actually make something out of these scraps. Laminated paper like that is sold under the brand name Micarta, and it's used to make knife handles, amongst other things. So I could have me a money knife someday. And this 5 peso dust is pretty cool too. Next, I needed to remove the front portion of the wasteboard of my CNC machine to get the rotary axis installed, which proved rather challenging.
Bitch. ¿Cómo hice? Fuck. How did I do this? How did I get you there? Sí. Oh, Mariano.
Oh yeah. Oof. Oh boy.
With the rotary axis in place, I now have to learn to use it because I've actually never used it before. And after watching a few tutorials on YouTube and playing around with the software, I was ready to give it a go. Using the rotary axis was scary because there is so much metal I can crash into if I program the machine wrong. That sounds terrible, but I think it's because this end mill is so long and my machine is not very rigid, so it vibrates a lot. I eventually got my feeding speed dialed in a little better later on. I did a first roughing pass and then I did a finishing pass. For some reason I could not get the toolpath to properly cut that edge right there, so I did that by hand, just jogging the CNC with the keyboard. I could then remove the roughly shaped part from the CNC and drill a hole in the bottom for a threaded rod to go into, which I can later hold onto in the lathe. Well, lathe might be a bit of a stretch. See, until now, this project was pretty much only new things to me, new materials, new technique, but it had all went fairly well. But this is the moment where I really started to go to school. I went about making my junky lathe, fixing it to my janky workbench, and then measuring the center point of the chuck and transferring it to a scrap wood I could use as the tailstock. I did not know how concentricity worked when using a lathe, since I actually never used a lathe in my life. So I did not realize that I needed to have my hammer drills secured much better than that. It's way too wobbly at this point, and also I think hammer drills actually do have a bit of play in the chuck on purpose, since they're not lathes, you know, they're hammer drills.
Let's try it, I guess.
It looked junky, but it seemed alright to me, so I hooked up my vacuum cleaner in front of it to catch the dust, and got to quote-unquote turning. And this is where I keep on making mistakes. I tried all types of tools, techniques, and I was removing material slowly, but I was not making a proper cylinder. You see, if something is not cylindrical, pushing on it with a rasp or sandpaper is not gonna make it cylindrical. It's like gonna compound the error, I think. I eventually got it to a point where it was not, but at least looked cylindrical enough. I sanded and shaped it a whole lot until I felt I could get started on the tip of the sculpture. So I designed and 3D printed myself a steady rest, which I really thought would do the job. This is meant to hold the tip of my workpiece steady without the tailstock being in the way. So I centered the sculpture on the tailstock again before closing down the steady rest onto it, after which I could remove the tailstock, and voila! Then I got to cutting off the tip of the workpiece, and I haven't yet noticed at this moment that my steady rest is not gonna make it. I should have made the tips of it with wheels. Out with the steady rest, on with more mistakes. I thought I could just hold the main portion of the workpiece with my hand and shape the tip with the other. But that proved annoying, so genius me thought I would just stick a couple pieces of wood under it and that did the job. That weird zucchini is way too wobbly now, so let's add another magic stick. Alright, that looks better. I did not notice the little hint of burning that just happened, so let's add another stick on the other side and keep on. That mistake cost me a lot. I won't bore you with that, but I had to sand away a ton of material to get rid of the burning marks, which resulted in my sculpture being totally out of spec. I mean, I polished it and it looks cool overall, and you might not think there's anything wrong with it if I didn't tell you, but that's not what I was going for. So after so much work and such an ordeal, I had to start over. But before that, I got sidetracked into a couple side projects that would aid into making glue up and turning easier. The first of which was a 3D printed laminating machine. This was the proof of concept right there. The way it works is that the big bottom roller is bathing in glue while the top roller feeds and presses the bill against the big roller, uniformly coating one side of the bill in resin. And then there's some metal splitters that separate the bill from the roller. The glue was not supposed to get on the top roller, but I didn't account for the viscosity of the epoxy. All of my previous tests were done with watered down wood glue. My friend Mariano, who had been helping me out with filming, lent me a hand for this glue up. This machine was working quite well. I have to say, I could hardly keep up with Mariano, and we managed to get all 300 bills glued in one go instead of two the last time. I won't go into more detail on the laminating machine, only that a more straightforward idea would have been to simply ask a couple of friends to come help me coat the bills by hand, like I had done the first time. But I got carried away designing my little roller machine, and I learned a whole lot, and I felt a huge sense of accomplishment when I got it to work.
Well, I think that's as much as I'm going to be able to press it. Oh.
My second side project didn't take as long. I designed a lathe, cut it up on the CNC and assembled it in all of a couple hours. The main idea with this was to cancel the wobble of the drill's chuck by using bearings as stabilizers. Despite not being as good as a proper lathe, I imagine, it did make the wobble a bit better. I also had a tool rest this time, which helped with the issue of compounding the error on my cylinder as long as I didn't press too hard on the workpiece. Having proper lathe tools would have been the way to go, of course, but buying some was not an option. The piece is, again, not perfectly cylindrical, but that's as good as I could get it, and I was not gonna ruin another one. I sanded it as much as I could on the lathe and then cut off the tip and took it out to finish shaping it by hand. And I didn't realize that shot would be polemic. It's nice to finally complete a project that was started like 4 years ago. This piece is called Inconsolable Argentina, and it's a play on words in Spanish because a dildo is called a consolador. It was the one artwork that was missing for me to complete my portfolio in order to seek gallery representation, or at least for me to feel comfortable going to get my work seen and eventually shown, hopefully sold. Who knows what will happen? I just hope someone will see this and think it's worth giving me opportunities to make more art. Thank you so much for watching.